Welcome back. It's another episode of the Better Learning Podcast. I am bringing on my new friends, Judy and Faith, who I've gotten to know them because they have a podcast as well. And I got to be a guest on theirs. And we had I don't know, would you say heated, fun? I say fun conversation, but we had some moments where we were clashing. But Faith, how are you doing? And then Judy, I'll get you next.
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having us. Yeah. We're very excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig into really like science or reading. Judy, how are things with you?
Things are great. I love taping with you. That was a really good time. We're releasing that episode really soon. It was fun. It was fun to see you and Faith go at it on the air, so I loved it.
What's fun is we went at it and then we realized, we actually agree on this. So that always makes it fun when we do that. But
really
but yeah, so give give the audience a little idea of like why you guys started getting into the podcasting world and what your podcast is all about.
Faith, I'll leave it to you.
So Judy and I met actually through another person who was actually part of our podcast. And she brought us together and we realized we had a lot in common. We both are from Brooklyn, if you couldn't tell. And we grew up near each other and we just became very good friends. But that's really how it happened. It was as simple as that.
And you just wanted to talk to each other every week, right?
Well, we had a lot in common because we're both literacy specialists, and we both started our careers in the city. Judy is still in New York City. I'm here on Long Island. But we both care deeply about kids reading, and we're both passionate. And we love talking to people about the subject.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump right into like the heart of this conversation because I feel like we're at a weird point in time where there's kind of confusion from the parents' perspective in particular, and then even just like from people who aren't spending their time within schools. But I would even say even the school leaders. I don't know if there's like complete consensus of we've been teaching a certain way in a predominant way of reading, a predominant way, and the results are, to put it mildly, have not been great. And now we're recognizing that maybe we are teaching it the wrong way. And from the popular culture side of things, there's things like a podcast series called Sold a Story that was out that really resonated with a lot of parents who had gone through that struggle with their kids. And I'm trying to get to the heart of it of like, what's the layman's term of like, what happened? Like what's going on in schools right now? Like, is there still debate? Is there recognition that the way we have been teaching for the last 20 years was not the right way? Like, I'm just going to put that out there for you guys to start from.
So basically, I started teaching about 26 years ago. I can't believe I'm saying that, but yeah, it's been a while. And right when I started teaching, phonics was basically on its way out in New York City schools and in a lot of schools. It was strange, it was confusing, but that's what was happening. So some of us knew that kids needed to know phonics, and we closed our doors and still, went over phonics rules and so forth. But the trend was really moving in the direction of something called balanced literacy. And the word balance basically was insinuating that there needed to be a balance, that there needed to be phonics, but there also needed to be making meaning through looking at pictures and using level texts and so forth. And for a very long time, the tide really shifted. Even though the intention was to keep that phonics, it wasn't really balanced in most schools. And what I was noticing was that there were a lot of kids that didn't learn how to decode and read words well at all for a very, very long time. They were looking at the first letter And even if the teacher wasn't teaching kids how to like guess a word, when you don't know how to decode, when you don't know a vowel team says E, or you don't know that, what happens to a word when it has a silent E, kids were basically guessing. And very often they were guessing based off of the picture and the first letter. That's called cueing. Faith can talk more about that as well. But basically, the data has been very low in a lot of the city schools and nationwide, and even worldwide, because we have a following worldwide. A lot of kids really have been struggling, and the data's been coming in for years, and it's like the world stood still and allowed it to happen. There was a program that a lot of schools were following. It was called, it was by Lucy Calkins, and also there was Reading Recovery. It was the Readers and Writers Workshop. A lot of schools still do it as well. The tide is shifting. But I think, like Kevin, you mentioned a question, has everyone shifted? I think that our podcast is helping people shift, because I had training in the old methods, and now 7 years into it, I've shifted my approach, because I knew that, we got it wrong in a lot of ways. We got some things right, but we got a lot of things fundamentally wrong. But I think there are still many people, unfortunately, that are so tied to old beliefs and have not shifted, even though the research is saying whatever we were doing before was not working. And I think it's really problematic. So we're hoping to reach as many people as we can and have those conversations. Faith, jump in, help me.
Should I jump in,
Yeah,
Kevin?
let's hear it, Faith.
So I've actually been teaching, I can't believe it, but 38 years.
Go Faith.
And I actually knew about this research, this science of reading, that came out really in the 1990s. And during the No Child Left Behind Act that came out in early 2000, 2001, there was this movement to try to bring this evidence into the schools. And I was actually a part of that, where I became a regional literacy coach with a push called Reading First. It was an initiative to get low-performing schools using this evidence that we now know as the science of reading. And I actually wrote about it in my book, Failing Students of Failing Schools, which is right behind me. So I actually had my story before sold a story.
Yeah.
So it was my experience in the schools. And I saw just what Judy was seeing, where kids were really using the context, and that's what cueing is, using everything other than the word to read words. And we know that good readers could read words in isolation. They don't need anything else. If they just see a word that's independent of any context, they can read it because they understand the connection between letters and sounds. And Emily Hanford sold a story pretty much exposed that this research was out for many years, and yet the universities, the publishing companies, and schools stayed with these faulty strategies, even though the science existed for many years.
So now that it's out there, because I listened to that series, and from the parent perspective, completely resonated. Having 3 kids go through it, and the first kid, it was very much of like the sight words, the cueing of like, what do you see, and and it's honestly really painful to watch your kid just try to guess what the word is, and when they guess right, be like, good job, you guessed right. And then to the point where you repeat that for every day of that week as your homework, and then by the end of the week they know it because they memorized it, but they really have no idea like how to actually decode or like read the words. And then it caught up to them, in 4th grade, where it's that moment where, that turning point of like, you're learning to read until 4th grade, but then you're reading to learn beyond there. And it was unbelievably frustrating as a parent. knowing that getting intervention, never getting like actually like tested and actually taught a different way. All the intervention was to double down on that method. And then we were super fortunate in that we were in a position and in a location where right down the street from us, there was a private option to do a 6-week intensive intervention. And in 6 weeks, he went from reading at like a 2nd grade level to an 11th grade level in 6 weeks. Fixed, like literally fixed. And it has not been an issue since then. And now he's, going into his junior year of high school. So I can resonate with that. And a lot of parents do that. Is that still going on? Because my younger two
Yes.
have been taught differently. So it is still going on.
Still going on.
Kevin, I'm curious, what intervention do you know? The intervention
It
that
was a
helped your
mix
child?
of Orton Gillingham with like some OT. So from what I remember, and again, this was years ago, but it was like a lot of like tapping and like being able to sound out, a lot of the phonics based, which my younger two went through more of a phonics based. They went through a Spalding program.
Yes.
And now I'm convinced, like, even though he was diagnosed as dyslexic and we went like all down this path of dyslexia and there was a big movement even in Arizona to make dyslexia screening like part of it. I don't think he's dyslexic. I really don't.
No. I would say probably not, because in 6 weeks, that's pretty fast. And there
Yeah.
are certain strategies and programs that get kids moving quickly. But I would imagine that was a curriculum disability rather
Yep.
than learning disability.
Some people call it dysteachia.
I put that in my book too.
I like that term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting though, Faith? Every time you and I speak, you always mention reading first. But then I was trained in reading recovery after reading first. I was trained in reading recovery, which is what Soul to Story is very based on, in 2013, and it was the opposite of the phonics approach. So how did we have all that information? And it seems like we knew, then we went back, now we went this way, and
That's a
why
great
does that keep
question.
why did that happen?
It happened because there wasn't enough of a movement coming from parents like you, Kevin, because at the time, we had the internet, but it wasn't like now with the social media. And basically, there was some movement, but most university professors were very happy to continue with what they knew. Most people don't want change. That would also destroy their reputations. And so they stuck with faulty strategies. And publishing companies respond to what the market is. And if people want certain products, they're going to give it to them. So even though there was this movement of change, which I was a part of, as Judy said, it went right back to more of that whole language, and then, of course, what we call balanced literacy. And even though we had the evidence for years, we didn't really make it happen where this shift moved in a direction. But I think that's changing now because more people know about it. And just what you're doing, Kevin, you're trying to get to the story and understand
Yeah,
it.
and I think that's unfortunately like the way our world works right now. It's like it's a lot of sensational. Like it's going to be the headlines that capture the attention. Anything about schools that makes it into the media is usually like more to create rage than to actually like create solutions to it. But it does feel like if it's still going on, how do we get more of that message out there? And I don't know the answer to that, so I kind of put it out there of like it shouldn't be that hard. Like everyone's going to the same conferences, everyone's talking about it. Like, is there still a fight? Is there still a debate, or is it, or like what's the barrier now to say, hey, we got to get this switch, because reading is going to be the building block of everything. Like when we talk about school, it's if you don't learn how to read, that is like the most basic piece of it. And and we can't even talk about all the other things. We're in such a we're trying to catch up in everything if we can't get that basic of reading.
Judy?
Yeah, I think that, I do think a lot of people are shifting. I think not everybody, but like even when we went, Faith was presenting at a literacy conference in New York City. It was the Everyone Read Conference. I think that was what it was called. And we actually saw Lucy Quilkins there, and she's the one that Emily Hanford speaks about the most. So it was interesting because this was a, structured literacy-based conference. I guess people, though, are wondering, is the intention because you actually really believe you need to make shifts? Are you doing it to make an extra dollar? What are your intentions? I think that the trust in the literacy community has really been broken because we all thought what we were doing for a very long time was the truth. I think that a lot of people are shifting now, but I think it's like a time where even on the other side, things shift all the time. There's people on the science of reading side that their research has shifted, and some of them stay quiet as well. So I think that basically, like, in order for the work to really move forward, it doesn't really matter what side you're on. When research comes out and evidence comes out about what's better for children, it's our obligation to follow that research. And I think the hardest part for some people that have not yet shifted is, A, maybe they haven't invested the time to learning because they're so tied up to their belief system. B, maybe some people see it as their identity. C, maybe some people aren't flexible. D, maybe some people are still financially tied into a different agenda. But I think for the most part, I see a big shift. And, behind the scenes, I'm even getting messages from people who had a strong balanced literacy training. They're watching our podcast. They're messaging me privately. They might not be coming on our show all the time because it's very hard to have, these kind of conversations sometimes. It depends on where you are in your literacy journey. But I think the key to really moving the work forward is not being afraid to say, hey, this is what I was doing before. This is how I shifted now. This is the impact it's having on kids. I think that on all sides of the literacy world, there's just been so much kind of like, I told you so, or I know better, or this kind of like pompous attitude, I know the right way, you got it wrong. That's not the tone that it should be. There should just be a more compassionate tone. And you know what? People won't always agree about everything. Like even Faith and I, right? We're both on the same team. But we don't, sometimes we disagree on some things. Like choral reading, she might think this, I might think that. Or phrasing and fluency, or, phonics instruction, or syllable types. So I think the key to moving the work forward is to have those real conversations. And, what's a little bit different about Faith and I, we're not working for a publishing company. We work for ourselves. We're still working in schools. We're still working with kids. And, we're not backed by the dollar bill of a publishing company and selling an agenda. We're just having those discussions because that's how much we care about, the future of literacy.
And I love doing this with Judy because I think Judy models what we would hope other teachers do. She is vulnerable on the podcast. Well, she'll admit, I was doing X for so many years, but now I realize I need to do something differently. And I think teachers appreciate that. They can identify with her journey. For me, I think it happened much longer ago, much further along. So for me, I've been doing this for a while. And I feel like I can't even remember when I did balance literacy. I remember it, but it's so far from what I do. where Judy was more in the process of changing and still changing.
Yeah, my change
And
really started probably, well, so I got trained in the old method in 2013. That role lasted for 4 years. What really started putting like these question marks in my head was when I had students that weren't doing as well as they should, even with intensive instruction with me one-on-one for 20 weeks. There were kids that were English language learners and kids that were struggling students, and they didn't get very far, even with me one-on-one. And I think part of the problem was because I didn't have the skills that I needed at that time to teach them how to decode and read the words off the page really, really well. So that's when in 2017, that position ended. So it's funny, like things come in, right? This is the hottest ticket in town. Everybody's getting trained in this balanced literacy approach called Reading Recovery in New York City. It's a grant through Obama. It was called the I3 grant. And then 4 years later, boom, it's gone. Why was it gone? A lot of kids weren't making the progress that they needed, even with one-on-one instruction. It was very expensive, and we weren't getting the results that we want. So then I got trained in structured literacy. That started in 2017, and I'm still deep in my journey, and it's 2024, and I still have a lot to learn. I think I'm a hell of a lot in a better place, and I think I'm helping a lot more kids and schools and so forth, but I still think like it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think, Kevin, like even being on your show was such a positive experience also. You know, we spoke about a different topic with you about classroom design and so forth. And, you know, we were talking about literacy and how that impacts instruction. And, you know, we got to hear your perspective. Some things we agreed with totally. Some things we still had thinking to do. But I think those kind of conversations, like the one that we had with you that we can't wait to post as well, are the type of conversations that need to happen. The easy conversations where everybody's in a silo talking about the same thing, agreeing with each other every single time, saying, yeah, you're right. Those aren't the kind of conversations that are actually going to shift the needle. Like when we went deeper, even speaking with you, oh, you know, this is what happens to happen during a phonics lesson. And you're like, oh, but maybe seating has to be flexible. Those are the kind of conversations that I think shift the needle. So I'm really excited that, you know, we're having that type of conversation again where we're, you know.
for me, I could tell you, it happened when I switched grades. That's when I realized that there was a problem. I originally started teaching third, fourth, and fifth grade. And then eventually I moved and I ended up teaching first grade. And when you are teaching in those upper grades, you just can't understand why kids are coming up to you not reading. So I thought it was something that was going on with the teachers. I don't know what they're doing. And then when I actually used those balanced literacy strategies teaching in first grade, I said, I'm working so hard. How come there are these kids who are not getting it? And then I started to do my own research, and I started to invest in myself because nobody was sending me for professional development to learn explicit phonics instruction. So I actually funded it myself and started to learn because I realized that I didn't know, even though I had a degree in special ed, a degree in elementary ed, and a master's in reading, I should have been able to teach the hardest to get kids up in reading. There was no reason for me not to be able to do that. So I started to get this training above my master's degree. And once I learned, there was no going back. I realized that this was the way to move forward. And that's when I ended up joining that Reading First initiative as a coach.
Yeah, we got into a topic before of research and, you know, how much you follow the research versus how much you recognize some things and then track it because, you know, like research has to come from somewhere. So the ability, and I think that's one of the things in education that honestly we're not very good at, is trying new things and then watching it. But first, like looking at those early signs of like, does this seem to be working, instead of I have to wait, until this 5-year study is done to say, oh yeah, that way is better. And in the meantime, we knew 5 years ago that the other way was failing, and we're not trying new ways to improve and iterate our way into better results. You saw something early without having that long research study. What are those early signs? What are the things that you can recognize that really only a teacher who's working with a student can, you can see it and you can trust that that visual, like you are seeing it in action without saying like, oh, I know someone else did a study somewhere else, and I can't try something new until I see the results of that.
So when I was teaching, I never really heard of dyslexia. I did not get any training in phonics. Could you imagine having a master's degree in reading and not getting any training in phonics? And I'm not alone. These are universities across the country, so it's not just my particular school. This happens everywhere. I didn't even know there was research that existed to prove otherwise. It was only through reading a book that changed my life. And it was called Why Your Child Can't Read and What You Can Do About It by Dr. Diane McGinnis. After reading that book, I just knew I needed to get the proper training. And so what tipped me off that things were wrong? When I saw that kids were substituting horse for house and, just looking at maybe the beginning and the end and nothing in the middle. And I just could see that no matter how hard I worked, using everything I was taught, it wasn't working. So,
I noticed the same thing as Faith, but even as we shift, it's not going to be perfect. I want people to understand that. Like, I was working with a kid just before we started taping, Kevin, and he's had a phonics approach in his school. His building does a phonics program, and he sees me once a week. And even with that, it's still not easy for him. He has a lot of the skills, but that application and reading piece of sounding phrased and fluent, or being able to, I know something now. I know a vowel team says E, but actually reading a word and being able to do it, it's still a process for kids. So I think that, even as we're transitioning, we might still see kids struggling. And my hope is that people don't say, oh, this is not working, because learning how to read is not very easy. For about, the research is finding 60% of kids need a really structured approach to read well. And, some people are looking for a quick fix. If the classroom instruction's not that strong, that could be problematic, right? There's a learning curve right now in the country for a lot of our teachers that are just getting into this method. And a lot of schools are on top of everything else implementing new programs for their English language arts block, where they're learning comprehension too and knowledge building and so forth. So there's so many moving pieces. And my recommendation to like everybody in the world right now is be a little bit patient. Change takes time. And even with this approach, some kids may still struggle, and that's basically doesn't mean that it's failing, this new approach, but some kids still might need more intensive intervention. Maybe seeing Miss Judy once a week is not enough. Maybe they need to see a teacher at school for intervention groups 3 times a week and so forth. So I don't think it's a magic bullet, but I think that we're going in the right direction. But I think really for me the telltale sign was watching kids, seeing what they do when they get to a word and they don't know it. Seeing, are they looking at me? Are they looking at the picture? Are they just shutting down? Are they taking their finger and sliding through a word? Maybe they're not. Now I have
but
to show
even
them.
as Judy said, even with very good instruction, there will be about 5% of kids who will struggle and need more work. They either need more time practicing, they need more days. It all depends, but that's not going to go away.
Yeah,
Even
it's not. And I think it's also, Faith, what parents and people in general might see a big shift in is the type of books kids are reading when they're learning how to read. I think that right now, people are confused about that. So for a while, parents might have seen their kids come home with leveled books. Oh, you're a level A, you're a level B, you're a level C. Now, what the hell is that? You're a level C. What does that tell a parent? Oh, yes, the benchmark's an I and you're on a level C. That means you're way below. So I think the
doesn't
biggest
point
shift
to any
now,
skill deficits. That's
right,
the problem with a
right,
level book. You don't really,
right.
you can't pinpoint where the skill deficit is.
So
As
that's
Judy said, just telling a parent, oh,
right.
the kid is at this level book doesn't help. The teacher and the parent should know where exactly the problems are, because if you don't know the problem,
Right.
you can't help it. You can't do anything about it.
And that's the biggest shift that you might see with like the materials. And people are like, oh, these books are boring, these phonics books. They're just used for a short window of time when you're teaching kids how to read. These are not the only books kids touch. I think people are freaked out. Oh my God, they can't read alouds, or they can't hold a regular book. No. It's about being intentional about the materials we're using and putting in front of kids. And there's nothing wrong with books that have, like Faith said, skills. We're working on Silent E right now. You're going to see some books that have Silent E in it.
And
So I
there are
think
very
that's the-
good, there are high quality decodable books that have good stories. It's
Exactly.
just really, there's been so much change in the last few years where there are more materials out now, books that can be used for practice. And getting back to what you asked about, Kevin, the sold a story, I think as publishers see that they can make money putting out materials that are aligned with what teachers need to do, you'll see more of that. They're in the business of making money and they respond to the market. So if we have university professors shifting and training teachers in the science of reading, and the schools are demanding for better materials and books, publishers will respond. So it's a cycle. And so it really needs to start at the university level. And professors need to make those changes. And if they're not ready to make changes, maybe it's time that they say adios.
You know, at the same token, with the whole concept of the sold a story, Faith and I are very honest and transparent. You know, just because now other people are saying, oh, we're the opposite of what was happening before, we're science of reading, that doesn't mean it's going to be perfect too. There still could be agendas. Oh, we're selling this program, it's totally aligned to the science of reading, you should buy this. You know, you still have to be careful. And I think it comes back to what you said, Kevin, too. Research is research, but we have to also look at like what's happening with the actual kids in the classroom. How are the kids learning? What progress are they making? How are they doing on assessment? So I think that point you made, Kevin, is really important too.
Yeah, I mean, we use the term all the time, radically student-centered, and to me, it's never losing that focus. Is that we can sit and we can look at research and we can, like look at the percentages and one, that does need to happen. We need to say like, hey, before we were at,
Yeah.
whatever percent, and now shifting methods show that we're actually improving there. But at the end of the day, we can't lose the focus on every kid. Like, we just need to make sure every kid learns how to read. And if it takes them a little bit longer, that's fine. But we can't let them go all the way through the system and just be like, oh, they didn't get it at this level, so we're just going to give up on that one. And that, to me, is where the urgency has to come in. And we just, like, that mindset of that, like, yes, maybe we don't know 100% the best way right now, but we know a better way and we're going to try it. And if that way is not working, we're going to try some other things. And and not just kind of sit back and, like, and wait, because we're failing. Like, we are just like, our system that we have right now is just too slow in a world that is changing so fast. And so to hear like how we're still using curriculum for like 20, 25 years ago, and that it goes back to the colleges and doing that, like that's where me as just somebody who understands we're playing a long game, but we got to have urgency on our actions, but then have patience on the results. But that
like
urgency
that.
on the actions has to happen like really quick on there. And
Yes.
we know we're in an era that it's like there's no reason there, like we don't need to wait for a new round of funding for a new textbook when there's literally like we can have digital tools right there like immediately. And that's the piece to me that's like is frustrating with the system. It's just how slow the system works when we are failing that kid that's right in front of me right now, and is struggling to read, and we know there's a better way to teach them. So that piece of it, I don't know how to get it other than to just keep saying we have to have urgency. We have to have urgency. Yes, we can be patient on seeing the results and collecting and actually like seeing the data later on.
I do want to say one thing though that is very
I was just going to say one. Go ahead, Judy.
I was
wonder
going
if
to
it's
say
the
that
same
one
thing.
thing that's really positive that's happening, and it's happening pretty quickly, is so schools used to use something called running records, and they have been debunked in terms of like their usage with the queuing system, and that's spoken about a lot in Soldier Story as well. So most schools that I know, and I'm hoping it's the same for Faith, are using something called universal screeners. They're quick, they're efficient, they're based on the science of reading, but they're also giving information quickly about the strength of your instruction in your school, but also looking at each kid and what their needs are. So I think that's like one of the greatest things that I've seen in the last couple of years. I think this is worldwide a game changer, and it's happening pretty quickly. So that's
good.
positive.
That's really good to hear.
And I was going to say, I love what you said, Kevin, about the urgency, but I just would hope that school districts really think about what they're purchasing. And although this is a dire situation across the country, we don't want people just making decisions without the information, because that has been happening as well. And they rush into buying something without understanding that it really takes a lot of work and teacher development, professional development, and understanding what the curriculum is supposed to look like. So I would hope that maybe they believe in piloting certain programs and looking at a small number, maybe one school out of 5 schools in a district will try something and then see what they think, or start off one grade at a time. But although it's an urgent situation, we don't want school districts wasting money either and then having to throw it out and start over again.
Yeah.
And Faith, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go for it, Judy.
Sorry. And it's kind of like what Faith's been saying for a really long time. You don't need $1 million to teach kids how to read. So even if you haven't decided like what program you're buying into, it's all about learning the knowledge about like what do kids need to do to learn to become a good reader. Like Kevin, you mentioned, or in Gillingham helped your kid. That 30-hour course that I took also during my career a couple of years ago, that was a lot of information very quickly that I learned on how kids learn how to read. So I think that just take some really strong professional development if your school is still, in the decision-making phase. There's always a way, even without like a whole new revamping of everything, to get better at what you're doing for kids.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll kind of wrap in a story to that, and then we're almost time to. But I have this routine where I go to a basketball court park that has a basketball court in my neighborhood, and I shoot free throws, and I've been doing this for 5 years. Where I go and I typically shoot like sets of 50 shots in a row, and I'm like literally track it. I'll pull out my phone and I put it into a Google sheet of how many I make, and I've been tracking it for 5 years. And when I did that, my first 3 years, I did not improve at all, like almost zero improvement. And then I started looking at it, and the best, like the all-time best free throw shooter, Pete Maravich. He's not anymore, but at the time he had the highest free throw shooting percentage, and he was one of the only ones in the league who shot underhand, like super embarrassing, like granny shots, like super embarrassing.
I'm glad you didn't say girly.
No, it's just like this, like it's nobody wants. There's nothing appealing about shooting that way. It's embarrassing and do it. But I committed. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try this for 3 months and see if it improves. And I did that for 3 months. It was embarrassing. Everyone would like stare at me at a park and be like, look at that guy doing that. And I was horrible at it at first, and I started improving. And I got to the point where I'm like, you know what? I'm too embarrassed. I'm just done with this after 3 months. However, after that, and then I went back to the normal way of just me shooting free throws. That's when I had like a crazy inflection of improvement. And I'm not sure why, but there is an aspect of it to me that thinks that if I didn't try something else, I wasn't going to improve. And that's the piece to me that's the whole idea of like we talk about growth mindset like over and over and over again in our schools, but we don't really put it into practice. We really don't. But organizations, companies do this all the time. And I don't want to say all of them, but a lot of them do this all the time. And that's the piece that I just feel like we're missing in education. There is not this iterative approach to improvement. It's instead of, we have to buy this whole program. We have to redo this whole thing. And to your point of like, you know what, sometimes we just have to try something different. And it doesn't mean we're committing it to it for 20 years. Commit to it for 3 months. Try it for 3 months and see if you see a difference. And I get it. We're in a big system that's really hard, that makes things hard like that. But there's a lot of school leaders that are listening to this. There's a lot of people that it's okay to try something else. We talk about growth mindset. We talk about failing. It is okay for us to try something just before you put all your chips in there, like those pilot programs and doing that. We need to just be trying some different things. And even if we come back and say like, yeah, that way didn't work, it might actually help you more in the way that you go. If you go back to the original, you probably learned something in there that's going to make you better at the way you were doing it before. And,
what's the definition of insanity? Think about it. Just doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. So I think with your underhand throw, maybe you got better at recognizing the distance from where you're standing to the basket. Something triggered you into shooting better, having a better target. And you're right, we need to do things differently. And I love the way you just said that. You're right, 100%.
Yeah. Well, and then obviously the research helps. The research helps for the people who be like, no, show me the research. But, I'll just keep saying the same thing. We're not trying anything new. Why? Like, we don't even have any data to collect or compare it to. So we have to be doing and trying new and trying different things. But yeah, all right, I'm off my soapbox. Anything else that I should have been asking you about while I have you that I didn't ask about?
No,
I had a great time with Kevin. What do you think, Faith? I think I know this is his show. He's running the show today, but I think he might become a no BS bestie. I like you, Kevin. I like what you have to say.
Well, we'll stay in touch.
Yeah,
Keep the good work. Keep
great.
talking to people. I mean, it really is. I mean, we talk about breaking down the silos all the time. We do need to just keep talking to people, parents need to understand it. The communities need to understand it. Like everyone really needs to understand it because, because otherwise, like it's easy to just fall into that status quo.
Yeah, and I just want to say one thing to parents out there. If you feel something isn't right, trust your gut. And a lot of parents think because the professionals should know better, they do know better. But a parent's instinct goes far.
Yeah,
That's all I want to say.
Great point. So thanks for putting that in there. To the listeners, if you're not already a subscriber, just hit subscribe wherever you're listening. BetterLearningPodcast.com is our hub for everything. And so if you want to make a suggestion for a topic or if you're interested in being on the show, that's where we collect all that and we break it down in our planning meetings and try to decide who we're going to have on the show and make sure that we're bringing the best content. And because that's what it's all about. It's like, how do we make positive impact in education? And so, Judy, Faith, thank you for work you're doing and for joining me. I really appreciate it. The views and opinions expressed on the Better Learning Podcast are those of myself as an individual and my guests, and do not necessarily represent the organizations that we work for, the Association for Learning Environments, K-12, Education Leaders Organization, or Second Class Foundation.